So, I'm going to tell you my story. My name's Lex, and I was born in Sheffield, in England. So, as a child growing up, as you do, getting childhood diseases, we've always treated those with medicines. So, antibiotics have always been something that have been commonplace within our family for treatment of disease or prevention of illness. And that's just been my path and my way. And when I was 19 years old, I found myself pregnant with my first baby. And of course, I went through the hospital system, had my baby in the hospital. It was very traumatic. I lost so much blood, actually, I nearly died. And so therefore, the process after that birth, the healing process, was one that was very much drug-induced and necessary somewhat in order to keep me alive. And so it was for the first 3 births, and by the time I was pregnant with my 3rd baby, I had pubis symphysis dysfunction. It's where the pelvis is imbalanced and it causes excruciating pain during the pregnancy. Anyway, this was the first time that my waters ever went before the actual labour process. And I called the hospital, as you do, and they asked me to describe the waters, and so I did, and they said, "Oh, it seems like your baby is in distress. You're going to have to come to the hospital now." And so I followed the instructions, and I had my birth plan in hand, and I showed them, I want a water birth, because I'd always wanted a water birth for each of the other pregnancies. And I don't want to be induced. I don't want any drugs in labour. I just want gas and air, and I just want to go natural. And very quickly, everything that I said I wanted, it was obvious I wasn't going to get. And then all the things I said I didn't want, that's actually what I got. So this was the first time that I was ever induced by oxytocin. And the reason was that my baby was in distress. The colour of my waters signified that my baby had opened its bowels inside of me. And so the plan was that we need to get baby out very quick, which is why I needed to be induced. Before that, they wanted me to walk up and down. And if you know anything about pubis symphysis dysfunction, then, or pelvic girdle pain as they call it now, because that is a bit of a mouthful, well, walking is very painful. And I was walking up and down and it was so painful. And so I was being induced, and of course, if anyone's ever been induced, you know that it causes the contractions to be more intense and more regular. And under all the strength of that pain of the induction of this synthetic hormone pumping into my body, they were like, "Why don't you take some pain relief? Why don't you take some pain relief?" And the nurse convinced me that I should have a pethidine injection. And so she went away to get the pethidine injection. And something inside of me just said, like, the baby is here. And so I stood up on the bed and I was holding onto the bed, and I took my hand and held where the head was crowning. And I said to the nurse, "You need to come back now. I'm going to have my baby." She said, "Look, there's no way that you're having your baby now." I said, "Yes, I am. You need to come back immediately, because if you don't come back now, this baby is going to be born and it's going to hit the ground." And so she said, "Okay, let me see," and comes back, like, starts freaking out. "Oh my God, the baby's here," and getting all the team to come in. And the baby was born. And he was on the bed in front of me. He lifted up onto the bed in front of me, so I managed to be standing up. And I remember looking over him and saying his name over and over again, and crying. And they did his APGAR scores, and those scores were 10, 10, 10. And this was a baby that was struggling inside the womb. This was a baby that was distressed, yet the scores were 10, 10, 10. And something inside me said, they made a huge fuss about nothing, and you don't really need to go through this process again of being fearmongered and controlled to doing things that you stressed that you did not want and not getting what you said you do want. The birth after my son Emmanuel was like a huge traumatic experience, because this time I developed a birth plan with members of the team, of the birthing team, so anaesthesias, the head of the midwifery department. I put a lot of effort and energy into creating this birth plan so that I could get the birth that I desired. And of course, when I went into labour and I went into labour ward, the first midwife that I was met with there, she was clearly not going to honour my birth plan, and it began with her wanting to do internal examinations, which I had refused completely due to the fact that I had strep B. So that's the last thing you want to accept when you have this condition. Anyway, with a lot of force, I ended up succumbing to what this midwife wanted and allowing for an internal examination to take place. And for me, that felt like rape. It was a violation, because even though I ended up saying okay, it wasn't okay. It was because my "this is not okay" was not being heard. And so therefore it was that I had to have this examination or else. And because I'd been fearmongered to believing that the or else meant that I would die, I was forced into doing something that I didn't want to do. So again, my power is just being completely taken away from me. And after that violation, the midwife said some very hurtful things and horrible things about me and about my child, and about their ownership over my child being more paramount than mine. And I realised we don't have rights, not in the hospital. And I looked at the notes that the hospital give you, and it says the property of the hospital. And I said, look, these notes, they're yours, they belong to you. These notes are a prejudice to me. And I left that hospital, and I literally ended up walking the street in the night, having contractions, completely alone, not knowing what I would do, not knowing what would happen to me. But because I was fearmongered to believing that this being my fourth child, I was going to bleed to death. And because I had this situation, the strep B, that my baby would contract it and that she would also die, I was like, what do I do? Because I know I'm not going to go back to that hospital. I cannot go there. I didn't feel safe to go there. Then this is the first time I had ever heard of a doula, and it was a friend that contacted me and said, look, contact this doula. And I contacted her. She told me about the community midwives. I'd never heard of community midwives. She asked me, why are you not considering a home birth? I'd never heard of a home birth. But of course I couldn't have a home birth now, because surely I will die if I have a home birth. And then she says to me, look, I will honour your birth plan. She says, this is the cost. I can come to the hospital, but try the community midwives. It just so happens I try the community midwives. I'm promised that I will be met at the hospital. What I found was a like-minded midwife that would honour my birth plan. And she honoured my birth plan, and as a consequence it meant that I could labour in the hospital safely. However, because when a woman is in labour, what she really requires is to be still. She needs dim lights. She needs peace and tranquility. because what's taking place is the woman's natural hormones are all kicking in, and this hormone's called oxytocin. And if the flow of oxytocin gets disturbed, then this can stop the labour, and it can cause the dilation of the cervix to cease also. And because of the great stress and the trauma that I'd gone through and the worry, it so happened that my labour just stopped. And then, of course, a new midwife comes in and she wants me to be induced. And I say, no, I'm not going down this road again. So it's off to the upstairs, off labour ward. You're going to sit in this room, you're going to labour in here. Fine. And what I found happened was that being alone and being still, I just breathed. And I literally breathed all the way through until I felt that pressure down below that I'd felt and experienced with my son Emmanuel. And I was, again, holding myself, saying, like, the baby's here now. And I got rushed in a wheelchair, being screamed at, don't have the baby here, whatever you do. And I'm like, what? Because the body takes over, and yet I'm being told to not do something that just felt totally natural to me. So I go downstairs, and luckily I'm met by the like-minded midwife. And because I'd fought for the birth that I wanted, because I did not compromise, it meant that my daughter was delivered in the most safe, respectful, peaceful, beautiful way. And the midwife had a student with her, and this was the student's first experience of birth. And the midwife said, thank you so much to me, because this was such a beautiful first birth for this student to have experienced. And they were thanking me for the whole birth process and how it had gone so beautifully. So now, having this experience with my fourth birth, I knew this is what I'm going to do. And so the fifth birth was a home birth, and it was in water, and it was my first water birth, and I had so much more control over the birthing process because it was in my own home, and a midwife from the state attended my home. However, it still wasn't perfect because she insisted on giving an internal examination to prove that I was actually in labour, because when she came into my room, I was breathing so confidently and calmly, because now I'd learned about hypnobirthing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And so she comes in, and I'm just breathing through my contractions, and she's like, you're not in labour. There's no way you're in labour. I can't stay here with you not being in labour. I'm going to have to go to someone else, and unless you allow me to prove that you're in labour. And so that was the first intervention. And so I received an internal examination, a vaginal examination, where she confirmed that I was 3 centimetres dilated. And upon receiving this, I say, oh, well, are you going to leave now? No, I'm not going to leave, you're in labour. Well, that's what I was trying to say. And so what you see here is that I am not able to trust my body as far as the establishment is concerned, because I don't know that I'm in labour. And the midwife doesn't trust me or my word to say that I am in labour, even though this is my 5th child. Surely a woman that's had 4 babies should really actually know when she's in labour. However, no, I need to prove it. I have to know, the midwife has to know, and therefore she'll do this internal examination, which is uncomfortable. It didn't feel good, and because she did it and she brought gas and air, it meant that I had to suck on gas and air to have this internal examination done. And what was happening is that she was interrupting the natural birth process. And so, again, it's like you are constantly informed that you cannot trust in yourself. Hypnobirthing allows the woman to trust in herself, and here I am being told you cannot trust in yourself. And it just so happens that time goes on and I'm now having to suck on gas and air, and it gets to a point that I say, look, because I'm constantly focused on the pain and the next contraction, and I say, this is not the birth that I came here to have. And so I put the gas and air to one side. I was insisting that I wanted to go into the birth pool. The midwife was insisting that I wasn't far enough dilated and therefore I couldn't go into the birth pool, and therefore she was insisting that I have another internal examination to justify my wanting to get into the birth pool. And so therefore I have to undergo another internal examination. And then she says, you're 4, maybe 4.5. And then when I'm upset because I was believing that I was much further ahead, it's like, don't lose your enthusiasm. Don't give up. You've been doing so well so far. And I'm inside thinking, but I was doing well until you got here, until you started imposing internal examinations upon me. And so therefore what I did was I said, that's enough. I took back the control. I said, I'm getting in that pool. I turned on my hypnobirthing CD. I got into the pool. I got into my zone, into my body. I tuned into my baby. I listened to her. And by doing so, the hypnobirthing track was 45 minutes long. As soon as the hypnobirthing track finished, I said to my husband, get the camera if you want to see this baby being born. And he gets the camera, and he has the camera on there, and the duration of minutes is 5 minutes, and the baby is born. She's emerged into the water. And so, by scientific standards, in terms of how midwives are trained and taught to understand the duration of the birthing process, what this is saying is, if I am 4 centimeters and I need to be a maximum of 10 centimeters dilated before my baby is ready to come, i.e. before I'm ready to push, that means by their measures, if they're saying 1 centimeter equals about an hour, that I wouldn't require another 6 hours before my baby was born. Yet my baby came in 50 minutes. 50 minutes. So what was the factor that changed everything? It was me. It was me stop focusing on what's outside of me, looking to the midwife to be the one to tell me how things are going to go, looking at the tools that the midwife brings like the gas and air, focusing on the pain element, and to stop all that and to just go into my own zone, to get into the pool, to feel the water on my body, to go inside of my own self and to trust in myself and my body and the natural physiological process that birth is, and to truly just hone in and hold on to that moment. And this is the difference, and it was the deciding factor, and it meant that my baby came perfectly when my baby was ready, which meant 50 minutes, not 6 hours. After this, you'd think I'd never give birth again, but I did, a 6th time. And this time was an unassisted birth. I never went for antenatals. I never did checks. I never did any of that. I trusted in the natural process that birth is. And I said to the universe, look, you've brought me here. You've taught me the way. You've shown me how to go into myself. You've showed me how to birth. You've shown me I don't need these external tools. I don't need the midwife in this scenario. And you've shown me how to go about birthing my baby myself consciously. And so what happened? I had an unassisted birth. And all I had was that process, the breathing, the conscious birth. And as a consequence, my 5th child was born in water, at home, with the cord around her neck, just me and her father. It was the most peaceful, beautiful, non-violent, undisturbed birth I have ever experienced. And yet, it was over 40 hours. And yet, she was 18 days overdue. So of course, 14 days, and I would have been in the hospital being induced. It's not safe to go over. But yet I'm looking at the universe and I say, but you've brought me here. Should I go to the hospital? Or am I not trusting in my body? Is that what I'm saying? I don't trust in this way. And so I kept having to lean to the trust. And a huge thing that helped me was understanding the role of the placenta. For me, the placenta was the midwife. And for me, placenta was the God in this equation that says life or death. Because if the pregnancy wasn't viable, the placenta would decide. And I would accept that. And if the pregnancy was viable, then the placenta would decide. And it would say life. And I would accept that also. So my birth, of course, I was completely responsible with all of the decisions that I was making all the way through. And that meant that if my child emerged dead, yes, it was a learning experience and we'll move on. And likewise, if she emerged alive, yes, it was a learning experience and we'll move on. And this is how it was. And this is how it is. And this is how conscious birth became real, alive, and true for me. And that is what we are going to talk about next.